ladies and gentlemen. Once again, that was Scarred Justice, the documentary about the Orangeburg Massacre. Now, I am pleased and honored to introduce our special guest for this evening, Cecil Williams, who is, of course, a famed photographer of the civil rights movement, who has been an integral voice in making sure that folks in South Carolina and across the country and the world are aware of events like what happened in Orangeburg and what happened throughout South Carolina during the civil rights era and afterward. He is also the founder of the Civil Rights South Carolina Civil Rights Museum, which we'll talk more about this evening as well. So again, I wish to introduce to the audience, both on Zoom and in person in the classroom there, Mr. Cecil Williams.
Thank you, Cecil. Cecil's come up from Orangeburg. He was there that night, and I know some of you may have been aware of what happened that evening, and we'll have opportunities to ask Cecil questions after he makes a presentation. I've been following the man since I was a child, and he's not that much older than me. Stand behind the podium and the people in Zoom land can see you. Okay.
Well,
and Cecil, you have to talk to that microphone in the ceiling right there. I know the FBI is listening, so speak up.
probably so.
Sure you say hello to them.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Whenever Brett Bursey calls me, you better believe if I'm anywhere within shouting distance or traveling distance, I come to see him because he, like me, we have been on this journey towards freedom, justice, and equality in America for a long, long time. Louder. Okay, louder. And to again present this film today, a film that depicts really a time in America and an event that even today, 2023, has never found this proper part of history, segment of history, nor has it been justified in history so that there could be some honor and dignity and perhaps reparation to the individuals that actually were killed and those that were injured. Their families had to pay their funeral expenses. They've never been reimbursed. So even though, again, this is like more than 50 years ago, it's still something in America that remains unresolved. When all the demonstrations all over the country were happening 3 or 4 years ago, I was reminded of the fact that they talked about police brutality. And as we saw individuals lying in the street in this country again, victims of police brutality, seemingly I was always waiting for journalists to take a look back at incidents like this, where police authorities, law enforcement had overstepped its boundaries and killed without provocation African-American youth in the streets of America and in Orangeburg, South Carolina. But I didn't see that. I didn't see journalists going back. Maybe they did not have the draw on history, the reflection and the perspective that people like Bert and I do. But I certainly did myself reflect back on to what a tragedy that was. My own personal story about this is at the time of the Orangeburg Massacre, I was really burning candles on both ends. I had taken a job with the newly created Palmetto Association, Education Association, and the South Carolina Education Association. They had merged. And I was also, though, at the yearbook photographer at South Carolina State and at Claflin University. So you see those yearbook pictures you saw in there. That's what I did. And I also had photographed, of course, the high school student, because I did high school yearbooks as well. All of my life, I've been a photographer. It's been something that I've been doing since I was 9 years old. And at 12, I shot my first wedding for $35. And at 18, became an official correspondent for Jet magazine. And so the books that I have written about the American civil rights movement from the perspective of South Carolina, I accumulated those images, probably one of the largest anywhere of those images that really tell the South Carolina role and the pioneer role that this state played in the history of the American Civil Rights Movement. And by the way, that is a period of time that I roughly define in my books and in the museum we have started in Orangeburg as being from about 1950 to 1970. Sure, there were events earlier than that. Sure, there were events later, but generally for the purpose of the most outstanding or the most notable events in the period of time, that's how I classify history. On the evening of February the 8th, 1968, I arrived back in Orangeburg and I immediately went on the State College campus before nightfall. And as I usually did, I photographed the students who at that time, the number of them were, sometimes it was large, sometimes it was small. Sometimes there were young ladies there, and sometimes the young ladies went back as it got dark, back to the dormitories. There were no guns on the campus of South Carolina State University. If so, those young men must have been very bad shots because no one was injured, no one was fired upon, and there were no weapons, as police and law enforcement alluded there to be. But around 8:30 or so, about an hour before the shooting began, I left the campus because during those days, 1968, I'm a vegetarian today, but I ate meat. So I went to get me a hamburger. When I tried to get back on the campus after getting something to eat, I went to all the entrances to South Carolina State. I went to the front entrance. Of course, it was completely blocked by the South Carolina Highway Patrol, National Guardsmen in the streets, the city police, and of course, SLED, who were under the command of Pete Strong, who again, and SLED officers were there as well. And of course, their cars were parked there. When I tried to get to another entrance, I also was not able to get back on the campus at that time. And then being a student at Felton Training School, which is one of State College's schools where, again, they have 8th, 9th, 10th grade, 11th grade, 12th grade. I had a history of knowing all of the places where I could exit the campus or enter the campus. And there was one place where two fences came together and it was just enough space for skinny me to squeeze through that place where those gates came together. But I went over there and there was a State College police person over there. And so I could not enter there. So I gave up, went home. During the night, as things were going on there, you could see even from my house, which is perhaps a mile away from the site. I lived on Quick Street in Orangeburg at the time. And I could see that there were lights out there, so you could see like a glow in the sky. This is February the 8th, where it gets dark early in the day. During the night, the telephone system in Orangeburg failed, collapsed, because so many people were calling back and forth. As you know, during that period of time, 3 students were killed, 28 injured in what is called the Orangeburg Massacre. Let me say right here that many, many more were injured because there were more than 100 students out. And if you're firing something like the highway patrolmen were firing at students, the double-aught cartridges, shotguns, inside, I think it's about 18 or 20 pellet-sized metal, I'm going to call it bullets. And as you shoot a shotgun, it's a dumb weapon by itself. It's used to kill big game. But if I wanted to kill a deer right here, I could shoot maybe way over here, and some of the pellets might go that far, or over here if I'm really aiming. So it spreads out the small pellets into a wide pattern. So to say that only 28 were injured and 3 killed really is a miscarriage to justice, because again, many, many more were injured. But what happened, since law enforcement and the newspapers were suggesting incite to riot on the students being out there, many parents came to get their students, their children, and they took them to private hospitals. But when you fire into 100 human beings for 9 seconds, and 9 highway patrolmen just shooting continuously for 8, 9, or 10 seconds, you can see that many more were injured than it was reported. The next morning, around 7:30, in a very overcast day, February the 9th, I drove my car to the campus of South Carolina State University, and I left the door of my car open. Again, it was a very chilly day, very early in the morning, and very misty, still foggy from what was going to be a early morning rain or near rain. And I had on a khaki overcoat. And as I walked on the area where the shooting and the students had been the night before, I could see there was debris on the ground. There were fragments of where the bonfire was built. And I also noticed these items that attracted my attention, and it turned out to be the spent cartridges from the shotguns that the highway patrolman had used. But I immediately noticed that this was a crime scene. But more hurting than almost many other aspects of this, the South Carolina highway patrolman, cowards them all, did not have the decency to put a crime scene tape at this site where they had murdered our brothers and our sisters. They didn't even have the decency. After they shot their students that evening, they gathered up their weapons, their cars, and they vacated the area, leaving it open. And I was one of the first persons to arrive on the campus the next morning. And there were these shells on the ground. The maintenance truck from South Carolina State had also arrived a few minutes, and they also started cleaning up the area. Keep in mind, this was a crime scene area. So they were picking up evidence. They were picking up all kinds of things. And also Dr. Oscar Butler soon also arrived, and I understand he picked up shotgun shells. So that kind of gives you a kind of a background of my involved in it. Through the grace of God, through my destiny, I missed being fired upon by about 1 hour. So I am, again, when I look back at this case and this history, 50 years, after, more than 50 years after it happened, it is with deep sorrow, even today, and an agonizing, a very agonizing feeling to realize that even today, this has been an event that has gone unresolved. The South Carolina Highway Patrolmen all were found innocent. I was called into the trial, which took place later on. In about 30 minutes, the Highway Patrolmen who had fired their weapons under the direction of Chief Pete Strong of SLED, the highest law enforcement person in the state of South Carolina. None of them, in fact, he was not even brought to trial. He was the highway patrolman. But there was a little bit of humanity on the campus that night, because you see, Pete Strong asked about 22 highway patrolmen to load their weapons, but only 9 obeyed him. 11, 12, or whatever that number comes out here, 13, or 12 or 13, they refused to load. So you see, there was some humanity among those that did not load their weapons. But 9 casually loaded their weapons. And one of the biggest misbeliefs about the Orangeburg Massacre is that many people today, as absent as is from our history books, believe that it took place on the grounds, on the bowling lane in that area in downtown Orangeburg, which is about 2 or 3 blocks from the South Carolina State College campus. But in effect, it wasn't. It was on the campus of South Carolina State University that highway patrolmen left the street Magnolia and went up on the campus of South Carolina State and started shooting the students on their own campus. Is the reality of it. And the students in disbelief, they believed that that could not happen. That's why they did not fare, because you have the National Guardsmen out in the street, you have the highway patrol, you have city police out there, every one of them has a weapon. But they didn't believe that they were vulnerable, being that they were on their campus. But for one of the first times in America, or it could be the first time, the South Carolina State Highway Patrolmen went on the campus and started shooting the students, who were all surprised by that, and also shot in their backs, in their heels. Almost all the wounds they suffered were from the back. There have been many rumors about guns on the parts of the being in the possession of the students. There have been many rumors about the fact that they were again, they deserved, they should have been in school, that they were trying to advance on the highway patrolmen. That's not true. They did, however, they were mischievous. They were burning a bonfire. They were yelling all kinds of language towards the highway patrolmen. Earlier than the shooting occurred, they had even thrown a banister that was actually, but not a banister, it was a piece of wood that was off of a house that was next door to where this site was. And it happened that it hit one of the persons on one of the law enforcement officers. That was true. But they also don't tell you that the violence that was precipitated on the evening of February the 8th had begun 2 days earlier, when we were at the bowling lanes and South Carolina Highway Patrolmen, city police, firemen. They testified that on that evening, and I was there, I got out of my car on Russell Street and calmly walked over to where this was going on at the bowling lanes itself, All-Star Bowling Lanes in Orangeburg. And I had my camera around my neck. And on that evening, as we were standing around trying to gain, the students were trying to say, here it is, a time in America, 1968, when the United States government had changed, and there was in place the 1963, 1964, and 1965 Civil Rights Acts that erased much of the racism, discrimination all over the United States. But in Orangeburg, there existed a segregated bowling lanes that was allowed to exist and not admit all people if they had money to get in there. But during that confrontation, this is something that I actually witnessed. A student in the crowded area of the bowling lanes accidentally pushed back against the glass. The glass developed a small crack, and just as it did, I witnessed South Carolina Highway Patrolmen and city police reach for their weapons and reach for their billy clubs, just because, not because we were, just because of the noise. And so I got out of there too. I ran, even though I parked my car across the street, I ran back towards the campus. As a young lady who was in front of me fell to the sidewalk, here's where the violence began. 2 city policemen began clubbing her, not because she had done anything, but because she had the misfortune of having fallen to the ground in front of the bowling lanes property, and what today is the remnants of what's called Sutcliffe Furniture Store. And this was like Main Street in Orangeburg, Russell Street. She'd fallen to the ground, and they just started clubbing her. It turned out she was a pregnant student. She lost the baby she was carrying, and they hit her so hard that one of the earrings she was wearing choked through her flesh. This is the kind of violence of law enforcement officers who did not respect people of color, and who again, started the violence that's related to, again, what's called the Orangeburg Massacre. So if the students were doing anything, they were mad because they had witnessed that. On their way back to the campus, some of them picked up rocks and they threw at glasses of some of the businesses. And so that's why they were being held on the State College campus, because what they had done 2 nights before, and the governor had called the meeting. This describes my experiences with what is called the Orangeburg Massacre and what happened. And I want to thank again Mr. Bursey for inviting me here to add some comments towards the movie. I knew the people that made the movie very well. They filmed me. I got cut out of the last part of the movie. I did too have a bit in the movie. My photographs, of course, are on the in the movie, and in fact, a good many of them are in the movie. And but it is one of the most accurate pictorials of the Orangeburg Massacre and what happened that night. And so whenever I've had a chance to view it again, when people come to my museum that I have founded in Orangeburg to date, it is one of the presentations we have that is in a continuous loop as visitors visit our museum today. But thank you again very much for this privilege of speaking with you.
Where is your museum?
My museum is in Orangeburg at 1865 Lake Drive. That is in a
1865.
residential area right off of Highway 301. Invite each and every
Yeah, the
person.
war ended 1865. I remember that.
I fought the Orangeburg post office for several months because I had stationery, letterheads, business cards, and probably $2,000 worth of printed paraphernalia that was relative to my business, because I pioneered that site in Orangeburg where the museum is located. It's a former house that my wife and I lived in, and today we live next door. But when the county came along, the county wanted to change the name that I had given to my address, because the post person that since I pioneered the street, she said, pick whatever address you want, because you're the first one and the only one on the street. So I picked 2065 Lake Drive. Several years later, when there were other houses built on their property, they made me change it to 1865. And I didn't want that designation, because everybody knows that rings a bell for a time of the Civil War.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, I had to live with it anyway. Will there be
Did you remember?
Yes. Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
Nice seeing you again. I visited your museum last year.
Great.
Very nice.
Thank you.
Of course, you were the first one who said on the campus the day after. Of course, you were able to take some nice pictures then, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and you've got them part of your portfolio.
In the museum in Orangeburg, we probably have the largest display of memorabilia connected to the Orangeburg Massacre. That and another large display we have at our museum. It is the relative to the case known as Briggs versus Elliott, a case that I, over the last 5 or 6, 7 decades of my life, have dedicated to a cause of trying to make a difference, where the first case in history that attacked segregation in public education came from a South Carolina case in Clarence County. But politics got into it, and of course, it was known throughout history as Brown versus Board of Education. But in our museum in Orangeburg, we also have the largest display of any other museum in the state about the, again, Briggs, Delane, and Pearson, and they're pioneering in South Carolina history that really started and impacted the American Civil Rights Movement, not in South Carolina, in this country.
So follow up with those pictures that you had that was so recent after the event. Were any of those pictures you doing the trial, and were they helpful at all? And maybe should have had a different outcome.
Oh, yes, ma'am. Evidence of things like photographs. And see, I had actually the shells. They were able to take the cartridges from which I picked up. I picked up about a dozen. And when the FBI confiscated those from me, they were able to trace them to the exact weapon that they came out of. However, I did not give them all of them. I have 5 of them in my museum today. I loaned them out, and when the FBI came to get them, I gave them all that I had. But later, when they were returned, I had the remainder. So my photographs, yes, and the things that I picked up led to, again, the highway patrolmen, some of the highway patrolmen who fired them. Yes, ma'am.
Even though they were found not guilty.
They were found, could be in 30 minutes, they found him not guilty. The trial was held in Florence, South Carolina. For 2 days, I drove over there while they were selecting a jury, that kind of thing. I was paid, of course, to be, one of the witnesses. But again, my testimony did not do any good. It was, they nevertheless found them all innocent of the charges.
One final, when is your museum going to move on the campus of State College or Claflin?
Neither one of the universities have expressed an interest in putting a museum there. One of the problems that I found when I tried to start this museum like what we have today in Orangeburg was that for 30 years, I've been trying to start a civil rights museum in the state of South Carolina to pay tribute to people who in this state, the identification and the recognition that we in this state really did start the American civil rights movement, even before there was a Martin Luther King, even before there was a Rosa Parks, even before there was the Montgomery bus boycott. And it is unbelievable that here, South Carolina, one of the 16 southern states, was the only state of those that did not have a civil rights museum. And even today, I cannot really get all the things in place. And that's why I started a museum. My wife, my sister, and I, we pulled together $60,000, and I had a building, but I did have the largest collection of civil rights memorabilia. We started a museum because the state of South Carolina let us down. Even today, a period in history when people of color, and for that matter, another notch on the, you might say, the pursuit of freedom, justice, and equality in America, because it also affected the Constitution. See, America was never happy with this Constitution that affected some people and did not evenly impact others. But the importance of the American civil rights movement was that, again, 1950 and 1970, was that in 1954, with Brown versus Board of Education, every person in the United States of color was impacted by what is called separate but equal. But Brown removed that from our Constitution. And because that was such, in fact, that's one of the most important periods of history. And this state, singly, even today, will not fully support what we're doing. We're having problems in really, where can we put a museum that it rightfully would belong in the state? We had to do it in Orangeburg, out of the way neighborhood, off of a main thoroughfare. And again, trying to do something for like 3 or 4 decades, again, after a while, you just lose hope that, again, where is this state, even today, headed? And what are we doing? So make a long story short, we don't know where we're going. A museum of the sort that we have done rightful belongs with maybe like here in Columbia, because this would be just as the people that, again, helped the museum in Charleston over a 25-year period to come together in Charleston at its rightful place. By the way, the museum in Charleston has a certain mission, and so do we. The mission of the museum in Charleston, and I have my ticket, and I'm ready to go to it when it opens, and waiting a long time. But its history will be about the entire 400 years of the African-American experience in America, wherein we in Orangeburg with the Civil Rights Movement, we are talking about just the 20 years. where would a civil rights museum like what we have founded really deserve to be? Like in Charleston, you have the Avery Institute, which was a very well-organized, a very popular school for African Americans in Charleston. The College of Charleston had enough foresight after many years of Avery trying to find out where it would, try to say that history. The College of Charleston put together a plan so they have a research center. So in reality, a institution here in Columbia, let's say, would probably be the most logical place for the Civil Rights Museum like we have found it. But we have not been able to really attract their attention. The problem we have with Orangeburg is that we are the place that our museum is supposed to be, and a place that the city of Orangeburg has requested that we relocate our museum to from where it is now. It is 100 feet from a railroad. I could step out of my house and, not out of my house, I could step out of that site on Boulevard and take a ball and just halfway throw it, and I would hit the railroad track, 100 feet. So it's not the ideal place. Probably a secondary place in South Carolina for maybe a civil rights museum would maybe be in Clarendon County. Orangeburg would be way down the list because Orangeburg doesn't have the dynamics. Downtown Orangeburg is dying. It's a ghost town. But I can't get, again, the leadership, the momentum, the historical, everyone that could help me to do this, do it. So more or less, even today, even though we have a very illustrious board, directors who do all they can to help us, we find ourselves, even today in 2023, like in a wilderness, trying to find a place to give respect and dignity and recognition to the people that changed this country. And it's an uphill battle even today. Thank you for, pardon me for that very long explanation of that question.
Cecil, I want your impression of the standard argument that we hear all the time about other people came in and caused the trouble. Our people's happy. And we heard Chief Strong saying that, and some of the other cops. Stokes was a SLED agent then. He moved immediately to the University of South Carolina and became the head of security at the University of South Carolina. But they're always talking about the outside agitators. Would that event have happened if Cleveland Sellers wasn't there when they shot at the students?
Cleveland Sellers had very little to do with the night of February the 8th. In fact, in talking with Cleve many times, and Cleve is a very good friend of mine, we have gone across this country where we make presentations over the last 50 years. Of notable memory is one we did in Washington about 3 or 4 years ago. Jack Bass was there, who wrote the book Orangeburg Massacre, which is one of the best accounts of this event we call the Orangeburg Massacre. But Cleve Sellers, again, was really framed. In fact, they had to rethink what they were charging him with, because see, he again played a very small role. In fact, he has admitted many times that it was not in his among what he was trying to do to integrate a bowling alley, integrate bowling lanes, because you see, this is 1960, and this is 3 or 4 years, and across America, most places had opened its doors for all people, regardless of their race, to become a part or take part in that part. Going to a restaurant, get a hamburger or a meal, restaurants, interstate commerce. But in Orangeburg, there was this pocket of resistance, and that was a bowling lane. So his primary focus at that time was not even, he was trying to bring to South Carolina State University a program in Black Studies, because it was not one there at that time. And again, but he was framed. But it's amazing that the resilience and again, the abilities of a person like him to go from being framed and put in prison to the presidency of Bohemes College.
Right.
that transition from from being jailed wrongly. I think out of the 1 year that he was sentenced, I think he served 4 or 5 months, but that was 4 or 5 months too long to be framed for something. But to specifically answer your question, again, there was no outside influence. That's always been something that has been thrown in our faces as we marched and demonstrated in Orangeburg. The next book that I'm writing, and I have to this day done 4 documentaries, but the next book that I'm going to release in 2024 will be a book about the student activism in this country. The rise, the leadership, and the impact of student activism in America. Because when I go in various places to make presentations, and I tell people that my audience or who I'm speaking with, that it was not the Reverend Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks that started the American Civil Rights Movement, but indeed had an earlier beginning in Clarendon County, South Carolina. I'm not being disrespectful for the best known symbol of the American Civil Rights Movement. And that's what King was in the brave people of Montgomery, Alabama. When I tell audiences that it was in Clarendon County, South Carolina, that this change and revolution started. And I say that was like the first wave of change. They really oftentimes question my sanity when I say that actually the second wave of change happened in Orangeburg, South Carolina. Because after the movement kind of migrated from Clarendon County and all the people who signed the petition to run out of Clarendon County, it moved to Orangeburg. So students were really the force behind the impact of marching and demonstrating in order to try and get intervention by the federal government who should have have the responsibility of seeing that the rights and privileges of all people are protected, including people of color.
Thanks, sir.
So again, the first wave of change in racial change in the United States, not Joe Louis in boxing, not Jackie Robinson in baseball, and they were, of course, again, pioneers. They did a whole lot. Not Lena Horne and her beauty in motion pictures, but it was an education case in South Carolina that had the most direct changes, which led to the, again, transformation of this country from that of a segregated society to that of a place of democracy and freedom for everyone. And so we have a lot of history here to say, but again, out of the history books, they don't tell this story. There are only a few persons of my age who can remember this period when we were doing these things, and across the country, there was not very much else going on. But here in Orangeburg, and again at South Carolina State College, it was the students who really, with their bodies, changed things. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm talking about 1953, 54, 55, and 56. When does the Reverend Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks, when do they come alive in history, so to speak? Martin Luther King first comes to light on December 5th, 1955. By then, students in Orangeburg at South Carolina State and Claflin had done sit-ins, but where do the history books of America tell you sit-ins start? Greensboro, North Carolina. So because the state has been so lax in accumulating, recognizing, and paying tribute to the people who started movements that impacted this entire country, we've lost out on so much of our history. And even today, it doesn't seem to be any better. So that's why, knowing that it costs millions of dollars to do a museum, and we certainly did not have that, but in 2019, my wife, my sister, and I, we did it anyway. And with an unbeatable force and God on our side, to today, and from 2019 forward, we've had nearly 15,000 people who have come to our museum, even though it is not in a appropriate area. But it doesn't, again, say so much about, the museum itself, and I'm not bragging about it, but it's the fact that we didn't have anything else. This is the first and only civil rights museum in the state of South Carolina. And 3 individuals had to do it. Our federal government did not do it. Our state government did not do it. Our historians did not do it. So it took a retired school teacher, a hospital worker, and a photographer to, again, make an investment in our history so that those people who gave up their lives and those people who marched and demonstrated would never be forgotten.
Yeah, I want to go first to Randall. He's had his hand up for a bit, and then Cecil Cahoon has a question as well. But Randall, go ahead, please.
Excuse me. I think I heard from the video that he was arrested in February, March of 1968. And I believe I heard his trial did not commence until 2 years later. It's kind of a bookkeeping question, but I'm just curious. Number one, I'm furious at the idea of hard labor. And number two, was he in jail for those 2 years before the trial?
Thank you for that question. It's something that I too have looked at because in the motion picture that you saw, and in some books and in some newspaper articles, I find that there is a lack of clarity regarding the time that he was actually charged. To be honest with you, I don't know the exact, because again, it's been over 50 years. But no, he was not in jail all that time. It was shortly after, and it was even before, in my memory, let me put it that way. In my memory, again, he was charged in jail. He was taken to jail on the night. SLED officers closed down Interstate 26, and they tell me at 100 miles an hour, they rushed him from Orangeburg from the hospital because he was shot in his arm. And they took him directly to the state penitentiary here in Columbia. And I think he remained there, but no, it was not 2 years later before he was actually sentenced and in jail. And he did not serve the entire 1 year, but it was much sooner than the actual, the case where the highway patrolmen were again put on trial. Thank you for that question.
When was the trial, Cecil?
I can't remember exactly the date, but it seems like it was towards the end of the year, maybe of February of 1968. I'm not sure about that though. Yeah, the trial was held in Florence, South Carolina, and again, it was if I remember correctly, an all-white jury that also part of the event there as well. There were no African Americans on the jury at the time.
All right, let's go ahead to Cecil Cahoon's question. Actually, Cecil, you just want to go ahead and unmute yourself, just ask the question.
And thank you, Dr. Green. Thank you, Cecil.
Yes.
In the documentary, Governor McNair and others emphasized South Carolina's concept of racial harmony. This was a code word with them, I think. And they said that McNair said this racial harmony had been interrupted by this episode in Orangeburg, had besmirched or smeared South Carolina's reputation for racial harmony. My own sense of what racial harmony meant was that so long as Black citizens and organizations didn't seek to overthrow the dominant legal and social structures that reinforced white supremacy here, then white citizens would tolerate Black citizens' presence, you might say. Because you lived through that period there, would you talk about what you perceived McNair's and others' use of racial harmony to mean? What did racial harmony mean in Orangeburg and in South Carolina in the 1950s and 60s?
Yes, thank you. Very, very, I think, relevant question. The way that I look at that is again, one of the reasons that I was hired by Jet Magazine in my teens was that South Carolina was one of the places that was not the local news medias in each one of the cities of South Carolina, Columbia, Charleston, Greenville, Aiken, Rock Hill, every place there were things going on. When there was a great demonstration going on, the local newspapers would not even cover that. They very seldom covered the events where African Americans were involved. And therefore, to the rest of America and to the historians and everyone who was writing, I guess, our story, it's almost as if, yes, you could put a title on South Carolina's, say, non-participation, but in fact, it was anything but that. There were many things going on. There's an old adage that goes something like, if a tree falls in the woods and there's nobody there to hear it, it doesn't make a sound. Yes, we were making plenty of sound, but the newspapers were not covering it, nor the television. Occasionally they would cover it because, again, I found out in the late 50s and early 60s that most of the time earlier, when I photographed events, I was the lone person there with a camera. But in the 60s, as I covered events here in Columbia at the State House, then the state newspaper and other papers were covering those events as well. But during the early days, I found that, again, events were not being covered. So yes, we got the reputation to state that this was a state where, again, we as people of color were happy that we weren't trying to shake up what was going on. We weren't trying to, again, go against the status that we were fighting against. But in effect, it was anything but that. It's just that the reportage, and again, the official position was from McNair that everything was quiet on the Western Front here in South Carolina, but it was anything but that. That was his interpretation. But if you were to ask a person at that time, like the Reverend I. De Quincy Newman, who was president of the NAACP, if you were to ask his opinion during those times, he would have a complete opposite answer as to whether things were quiet and whether this was a state where we had a moderate approach to changing from a segregated society to an integrated society. There were attempts by our foremost legislators to even close the schools. They were going to close the schools of the state of South Carolina because the Supreme Court had ruled in Brown versus Board of Education that segregation in public education. So even though that happened in 1964, the South disobeyed, the South Carolina especially, and its politicians disobeyed that. My own sister did not get to go to the schools in Orangeburg until about 1968 or 69. Here was a Supreme Court case that ruled that segregation in public education is unconstitutional. So it took that long for this state to come around. Thank you very much for your question.
All right, and I see Becky has her hand raised. We'll get to Becky, then a couple of questions in the chat.
Thank you. Cecil, I really appreciate you being here tonight, and your service is just a gift to all of us. So thank you for that. And you said you picked up a camera at age 9. Is that right?
That's
I'm just
right.
wondering, how did you get the camera and how did you get started? And did you do any official training? I mean, how have you managed to keep your profession going all of these years?
I think that each one of us, we are a lot of times, a lot of cases, we are. It's a destiny that we all live. I think it was my destiny to really be a photographer of the civil rights movement of America. At 9 years old, I started with a baby brownie camera that my brother had given me after he took up a liking to blowing the saxophone. Okay. And I thought of that camera as a little magic box. It was a Kodak baby brownie. It cost $2.25 from Sears. And I began to put it to a use where, as a 9 or 10-year-old, I would take pictures at Edisto Gardens get the film developed at a drugstore in Orangeburg. And on Sundays, I would go to Eddystone Gardens and take pictures of people dressed up in their finery and charge them $1, and I would make a little profit there for doing that. So that's really you can imagine how even $1 was to a 9 or 10, 11-year-old. And then I migrated to a better count. And then even at 14 years old, I was sending my pictures out to national publications because most of the local newspaper outlets in the very beginning would not accept my photographs, except the Associated Press. But at 18, then I become officially a Jet magazine correspondent, and of course then I was working exclusively for them and also taking photographs such as weddings and other things and the other activities that I could find around Orangeburg to support my buying a car and other things and to help the family out as well. So that's kind of a quick answer to how I got started in photography and how I kind of got in. I really believe that all of us are so much. I believe that it's a divine journey that I have walked and lived my entire life. I believe that so much God is in that of what we do and what role we play in society. And I very definitely think that for me to again start a civil rights museum in the state of South Carolina with $60,000, that is again a miracle in itself.
We have some questions up there.
We've actually got a question here in the room. Yes, ma'am, go ahead.
Hi, Mr. Williams. I'm Etta Lennon, and I spoke with you recently about coming to your museum, not myself, but my sorority. We hope to come to visit in October, and I want to thank you for your tenacity for opening the museum and for having it here for us. But my question is about something that I saw in the film. There was a gentleman who stood up, I guess it was at a town meeting or something, and he posed the question to the representatives on the stage that said, you know, we all know that if this had happened at Clemson University, if 3 white students had died, that there would be an investigation or something to that effect. And I believe it was Senator Hollings who gave a response, which I'm not quite sure what he said exactly or the rationale behind what he said, but I'm just wondering if you can tell us or explain what it is he was saying or trying to say, because the gentleman that spoke, I thought he had a pretty rational question, but his response was not, I didn't think, rational.
That gentleman that asked that question was my good friend, Jack Bass. Jack Bass has been a friend for more than 30 years. He was the lone, brave white journalist who, again, did not let local and state politics get into his way of writing the most authentic account about the Orangeburg Massacre. He and a gentleman from a Los Angeles newspaper wrote the Orangeburg Massacre, and it is the most authentic account. So it was Jack Bass that asked that question. He asked the question that if this had happened on the campus of Clemson, would not something have been done about it? And then Hollins replied back that, oh, come on now. You could have might as well say the city. I was in attendance at that meeting. That was in Charleston, South Carolina. And they had really a very diverse number of individuals coming from all over the United States into a conference at Clemson. And they explored not only the Orangeburg Massacre, but all of South Carolina's history. It's put on by the Citadel. And of course, they had former governors there. They had, again, people, journalists like Jack Bass. And it was him who had the courage to, again, ask that kind of question. And it was a proper question. In fact, no, had it been a white university, it would not have been allowed to stand that those highway patrolmen who cared to load their weapons and shoot students who were innocent, they would have been charged and put in jail for what they had done. It's more also very, I was really shocked by the fact that one of the highway patrolmen who you saw in the film not only did they find him innocent, they also elevated him to being the head of the South Carolina Highway Patrol. And that was like a slap in the face. Whereas not only were they saying, well, okay, you got away with shooting, killing people, but now we're going to even put you in a position where you can continue your philosophy of race, hatred towards people.
Cecil, we've got a number of hands on the Zoom land, so we're gonna have to be brief and taking them, we're gonna run out of time.
Okay.
Dr. Green, you were keeping a list? I know that Cecil Rigby had his hand up. Cecil, why don't you just go ahead and ask your question?
Hello, Cecil. I really appreciate your presentation today. To your knowledge, did Bakari Sellers, while he was a South Carolina legislator, support your efforts or anyone else's efforts to create this South Carolina Civil Rights Museum?
I missed the first few words you said about that.
Cecil, I got it.
Okay.
He wanted to know if Bakari helped you start your museum while he was a legislator from Orangeburg.
No, not necessarily. It was not anything that really be brought up before Bakari when he was there. Bakari is, of course, a very, very talented legislator. Then he was, and of course, even in his role today. In fact, just 2 weeks ago, I was with Bakari and photographed him. He was the speaker at Claflin University. But no, it was. When I say for the last 30 years that I've been trying to start a museum, it's not something that every day I was trying to do it, but I was writing proposals. I was seeking out the persons that could have made a difference and could have done it, and it was unsuccessful, but not necessarily him in particular or him individually. Thank you for that question.
On Cecil?
Yes, sir. Hey, yes.
On the matter of Bakari, it's interesting that Bakari and Pete Strom's son are law partners these days.
Yes, thank you, Jim Felder. Jim Felder is, again, one of those individuals who, like me, we've been on this journey towards equality and justice in America for many, many, many decades. And so when I go about trying to start a civil rights museum, and I'm a photographer, and you know, been in that over my years, one of the first things that I did was I tried to put together the most qualified group of individuals who would help us to do that. And Mr. Felder was one of them. And I thank you very much for your presence on the board. And not only is Mr. Felder on our board, but Mr. Felder is also the chairman of our board. And again, has worked tirelessly to help us bring about, again, a civil rights museum location that would properly represent the people that we are trying to, again, recognize and pay tribute to.
Jim Felder is our guest presenter tomorrow night at our Modjeska School class that covers that lead up, the run up to there being a Black elected official in South Carolina's legislature for the first time since 1898. So tune in tomorrow to find out who that might be.
Thanks, Brett.
Thank you. Would there be a final question, or be very happy to attempt to answer it?
Well, I have one final question, maybe real quick about it. Tell us what's happening with the All-Star Museum, the All-Star Bowling Lane, excuse me.
The All-Star Bowling Lanes, in bringing it back, is being undertaken by a local Orangeburg resident. It's right now not showing a lot of progress, but if there's anything, if it turns out that my Civil Rights Museum is to stay in Orangeburg and we develop a museum there, the other thing that will bring a lot of tourist traffic too would be the bowling, All-Star Bowling Lane, which is being, again, they're trying to renovate it and then bring it back. It's going to be an operation bowling lanes. So Orangeburg is a very unique place. I've lived there all my life. And of course, you have all of the images and most things coming from the fact that it's a very rare place to have a small town with two big universities. So they kind of swell the enrollment and the population of Orangeburg. At the same time, a lot of times they struggle with even being able to vote, even if they're 18 years old, if they are residents for that 9 months of the year. So it's kind of a, we're kind of voiceless sometimes from the standpoint of the fact that we have a large student population in Orangeburg.
Dr. Green, you want to wrap it up? I wanted to ask people that are interested in going on a field trip with the Modjeska School to Cecil's Museum to send us an email or put your name on the list at the back of the door. And thanks so much, Cecil.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Cecil Williams. All right, folks. So for tomorrow evening, of course, as Brett mentioned before, we'll be pleased and honored to welcome James Felder to help us talk a bit about what's going on in South Carolina in the so-called post-civil rights era, the late 60s and early 70s, an era that, as you'll see tomorrow, is really integral to understanding South Carolina as it is today. In fact, many of the posters and placards in the Progressive Network headquarters are actually from that time period. So we're going to talk a bit about the growth of Black political and economic power in the state in the late 60s and early 70s, but also the growth of various social movements in South Carolina and across the country during a pivotal time in the state's history and a pivotal time in American history as well.
Thank you, sir.
So until then, have a good one.
Thank you.